The wind, a constant, powerful presence on Zephyr, tugged at Aiden's hair as he stepped off the transport shuttle. He looked up, mesmerized by the floating islands, verdant plateaus suspended amidst a swirling cerulean sky. Below, the planet's surface churned with perpetual storms, hidden beneath a thick layer of white cloud. Zephyr. His new home. And the site of his latest research. He took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of unfamiliar flora, and tried to ignore the familiar tremor in his legs. Heights had always been a problem, a cruel irony for a xenobotanist specializing in high-altitude ecosystems. He was here to study Zephyr's unique floating flora, its delicate balance, a miracle of nature he longed to understand. But his dream held a deeper meaning. Perhaps by unlocking Zephyr's secrets, he could create sustainable ecosystems in space, vibrant oases mirroring these floating islands, places where families could live without fear, places where tragedies like the one that shattered his childhood on the orbital station wouldn't happen. Aiden was guided towards the main settlement, a network of interconnected platforms tethered to the largest island. He watched the Zephyrians move with an almost ethereal grace, their avian features and iridescent plumage catching the light. He noticed her then, standing slightly apart from the others, her feathers a shimmering kaleidoscope of blues and greens. Xylo. He'd read about her in the briefing materials. A sky singer, a cultural leader, her voice said to harmonize with the very winds that held this world aloft. As he neared, she turned, her gaze piercing and curious. Her feathers shifted, a ripple of violet spreading through the blues and greens. It was then the wind faltered, a sudden, unsettling stillness, and a low hum vibrated through the platforms. The Zephyrians around him murmured, their faces etched with concern. Xylo looked towards the horizon, her expression troubled. "The winds, they are changing," she said, her voice melodic, yet edged with worry. Later that evening, as the sky singing ceremony commenced, the initial signs of the ecological crisis became starkly apparent. The wind, usually a steady, powerful force, pulsed erratically. Petals from the vibrant sky blossoms rained down like colorful tears, the plants themselves wilting before his eyes. Several smaller islands drifted precariously, their tethers straining against the unpredictable gusts. The Zephyrian song, usually a soaring celebration of life, now held a note of fear. After the ceremony, Aiden found Xylo staring out at the turbulent sky. He hesitated, unsure whether to intrude, but she beckoned him closer. "The harmony is broken," she whispered, her voice tinged with sadness. "Our islands, they are weakening." Aiden felt a pang of sympathy. He saw not just an ecological crisis, but the potential loss of a unique culture, a way of life intrinsically tied to this fragile ecosystem. "We will find a way to help," he said, the words both a promise and a prayer. He wasn't sure how yet, but the look in her eyes, a mixture of hope and despair, ignited a fierce determination within him. He had to try. Not just for the sake of his research, not just for the Zephyrians, but for her. In that instant, looking into her troubled eyes, his purpose on Zephyr had subtly shifted. His mission remained, but a new, unexpected desire, a seed of something powerful and unfamiliar, had been planted within him, carried on the whispers of Zephyr's troubled wind. The wind howled, a mournful cry that echoed the growing despair on Zephyr. The smaller islands, once vibrant with life, now resembled skeletal rafts, their vegetation withered, their tethers snapping under the strain of the erratic gusts. Evacuations were underway, the Zephyrians moving with a somber grace that contrasted sharply with the panicked cries of the displaced sky birds. Aiden watched from the relative safety of the main platform, the tremor in his legs a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. His fear of heights, usually a dull ache, now clawed at him, a visceral terror mirroring the escalating crisis. The Zephyrian Council, a circle of elders whose plumage held the muted hues of age and worry, had finally agreed to allow Aiden's team to investigate the magnetic field disruption. Their reluctance, born from a deep distrust of human technology, had only exacerbated the crisis. But desperation had won over suspicion. "We must understand the nature of this disruption," Xylo said, her voice reaching Aiden over the wind. Her feathers shimmered with a nervous energy, a mix of turquoise and gold. "Our ancestors knew how to listen to the whispers of Zephyr. Perhaps you, with your instruments, can hear what we cannot. Aiden met her gaze. He saw not only the weight of her responsibility as a sky singer, but also a flicker of trust, a fragile hope that he could help. "We'll do everything we can," he said, the words catching in his throat. The instability of the platforms, the constant swaying, amplified his fear, making him feel dizzy and nauseous. He willed himself to remain calm, focusing on the task at hand. He had to push his fear aside, not only for the sake of his research, but for Xylo, for the hope he saw in her eyes. As he worked with his team, setting up the magnetic field sensors, he felt Xylo's gaze on him. He caught her watching him several times, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. During a lull in the wind, she approached him, her feathers now a calming shade of deep blue. "You struggle," she said, her voice soft. "With the height?" Aiden nodded, unable to deny it. He looked down at the swirling clouds below, a wave of nausea washing over him. He felt a hand on his arm, light yet firm. Xylo's touch, surprisingly warm, sent a jolt through him, a strange mix of comfort and unease. "Look at me," she said, her voice steady. Her eyes, large and intelligent, held a surprising depth. He focused on her, the swirling chaos around them fading into the background. Her presence was a calming anchor in the storm. "The wind is your friend," she continued, her voice like a gentle melody. "Let it hold you. Let it guide you." He took a deep breath, her words strangely soothing. He felt a shift within him, a lessening of the fear, a nascent sense of trust, not only in her words, but in her presence. He realized then that his feelings for Xylo were more than just admiration. It was a pull, an unexpected connection forged in the crucible of this shared crisis. That night, while Aiden pored over the sensor data, a messenger arrived, his feathers ruffled with urgency. Xylo's face paled as she listened. A rogue faction of Zephyrians, fearing human interference, had sabotaged a key wind turbine, further destabilizing the islands. The council had refused to believe it was an inside job, further inflaming tensions. Xylo had to convince them, had to expose the saboteurs before they caused further damage. But the route to the council chambers, across a series of precarious rope bridges, was now even more dangerous due to the erratic winds. Aiden, seeing the fear in her eyes, knew what she had to do. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a desire to shield her from the danger. But he also knew he couldn't stop her. This was about more than just saving the islands, it was about her duty to her people, her unwavering belief in finding a solution, even if it meant risking her life. He watched her prepare to leave, her feathers now a vibrant mix of scarlet and orange, a sign of her resolve. He took her hand, his heart pounding in his chest. Their touch was brief, but charged with an unspoken understanding. "Be careful," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a determination that both inspired and terrified him. She gave a slight nod, then launched herself into the swirling wind, a solitary figure against the darkening sky. He watched her go, his heart a knot of fear and admiration. He had to find a way to stabilize the islands, not just for the Zephyrians, but for her. He had to prove that his presence here, his technology, could be a force for good, not just a source of fear and suspicion. He had a duty to humanity, but now he also had a responsibility to Xylo, a responsibility that transcended species, a responsibility born from the fragile, burgeoning love that whispered between them on the wind. The rhythmic hum of the wind turbines, usually a comforting sound, was now a constant reminder of Zephyr's fragility. Aiden hunched over the console, the data from the magnetic field sensors painting a grim picture. The disruption was worsening, spreading like a contagion through the planet's core. He could feel Xylo's anxiety radiating beside him, the iridescent sheen of her feathers pulsing with a nervous energy. "The source," he muttered, tracing a jagged line on the display. "It's coming from deep below the surface. A mineral deposit, reacting with the atmospheric currents." Xylo's eyes widened, her feathers shifting to a vibrant shade of emerald. "The singing stones, legends speak of them. Crystals that resonate with the heart of Zephyr. But they were thought to be mere myth. Their discovery was a breakthrough, a crucial step towards understanding the crisis. But it also confirmed Xylo's deepest fears. The very foundation of their world, the harmony between the wind and the land, was crumbling. He saw a flicker of despair in her eyes, a fear not only for her people, but for the loss of a way of life, a culture intrinsically tied to this fragile ecosystem. He reached out, his hand hovering over her arm. He hesitated, unsure whether his touch would be welcome, whether the difference in their physiology would make it uncomfortable, or even harmful. He knew so little about her species, about her. But he couldn't stop himself. He had to offer some comfort, some reassurance. He gently placed his hand on her arm, his fingers brushing against the delicate structure of her feathers. They felt surprisingly soft, warm beneath his touch. A tremor ran through her, her feathers rippling with a mix of surprise and something else, something that felt like acceptance. He left his hand there for a moment, the warmth spreading through him, a silent reassurance that they were in this together. "We can fix this," he said, his voice filled with a conviction he didn't fully feel. But he saw a flicker of hope return to her eyes, and he knew he had to try. For her. For Zephyr. Their collaborative efforts, a blend of human technology and Zephyrian knowledge, had begun to bridge the cultural divide. The Zephyrians, initially wary of his instruments and methods, now watched with a growing respect, their curiosity overcoming their suspicion. He learned from them, their intuitive understanding of the wind and its patterns, their deep connection to the planet's natural rhythms. He, in turn, shared his knowledge of planetary science, explaining the magnetic field disruption in terms they could understand. But their fragile alliance was threatened from within. The saboteurs struck again, this time disabling the main communication relay, isolating the main island from the smaller settlements. Xylo received the news with a stoic calm that masked a deep turmoil. The council, still clinging to their distrust, refused to acknowledge the possibility of internal dissent. Xylo knew she had to act, had to convince them before the saboteurs caused further damage. "I must speak to the council," she said, her voice tight. "But the communication lines are down. I have to go to the Whisperwind Spire. It's the only way to reach them directly." Aiden's heart sank. The Whisperwind Spire was the tallest, most unstable of the islands, a precarious pinnacle exposed to the full force of Zephyr's winds. For Xylo, with her hollow bones and limited gliding ability, the journey was perilous. For him, with his crippling fear of heights, it was unthinkable. "It's too dangerous," he protested, grabbing her arm. The warmth of her feathers under his hand was a stark contrast to the icy dread that gripped him. "I must try," she said, her voice unwavering. "My people need me. And I need them to trust you." He realized then that this wasn't just about her duty to her people. It was a leap of faith, a desperate attempt to bridge the divide, to prove that she believed in him, in the potential for cooperation between their species. She turned to leave, her feathers now a fierce blend of crimson and gold, a sign of her determination. He watched her go, his heart a turbulent mix of fear and admiration. He knew he couldn't stop her. He could only hope that her faith in him, in humanity, wouldn't be misplaced. He looked down at the data streaming across his console, the jagged lines a stark reminder of the crisis unfolding around them. He had to find a solution, not just for Zephyr, but for her. He had to be worthy of the trust she had placed in him, a trust that was quickly blossoming into something more profound, something that defied the vastness of space and the differences in their species, a love born amidst the whispers of Zephyr's troubled winds. The Whisperwind Spire loomed before him, a jagged finger of rock pointing accusingly at the turbulent sky. It was a testament to Zephyrian ingenuity, a precarious platform built on the highest, most unstable island, exposed to the full force of the planet's winds. It was also Xylo's destination, and the focal point of Aiden's escalating fear. He traced the lines of her flight path on the monitoring screen, his heart clenching with every erratic gust that buffeted the fragile structure. He knew she was risking her life, not just to reach the council, but to prove her faith in him, in the possibility of cooperation between their species. The weight of that trust pressed down on him, heavy as the turbulent air around the spire. He couldn't just stand here, paralyzed by his fear. He had to do something, anything, to help her, to prove himself worthy of her trust. He looked at the schematics for his anti-gravity stabilizers, a design he'd been working on for years, a design that could potentially hold the islands aloft, even in the face of the magnetic field disruption. It was a long shot, untested, risky. But it was their only hope. He activated the stabilizers, their low hum a counterpoint to the howling wind. He adjusted the frequency, trying to match the erratic rhythm of the gusts, trying to create a pocket of stability around the spire. It was a delicate dance, a battle against the forces of nature, a battle he wasn't sure he could win. His focus narrowed, the fear receding as he poured all his energy into the task at hand. He was no longer just a scientist, a researcher. He was a protector, a shield against the storm, fighting for the woman he was rapidly falling in love with, a woman who was risking everything for him. Hours crawled by, each one an eternity. The wind howled, the spire swayed, and his heart pounded in his chest. Finally, a flicker of movement on the monitor. Xylo, returning. Her flight was unsteady, her movements hesitant, but she was alive. He watched as she landed on the main platform, her feathers ruffled and dull, her normally vibrant colors muted by exhaustion. He rushed towards her, his fear momentarily forgotten. Xylo! She stumbled towards him, her eyes wide with relief. He caught her as she faltered, his arms going around her delicate frame. He felt the warmth of her feathers against his skin, the fragile bones beneath them. He held her close, his heart pounding against his ribs, a mixture of relief and a burgeoning love that defied the vastness of space and the differences in their species. For a moment, they stood there, embraced amidst the chaos, two figures clinging to each other in the eye of the storm. The wind howled around them, a mournful cry that echoed the fragility of their world. But in that embrace, Aiden found a quiet refuge, a sense of peace he hadn't known since the loss of his family on the orbital station so many years ago. This woman, this alien, this creature of air and feathers, had become his anchor, his hope, his reason for being on Zephyr. He pulled back slightly, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs gently stroking the delicate feathers on her cheeks. He looked into her eyes, seeing a reflection of his own fear, his own hope, and something else, something deeper, something that mirrored the growing feelings within him. "You were right to trust me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I won't let you down." She nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. He leaned in, drawn to her like a moth to a flame. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if his touch would be welcome, if their different physiologies would make it uncomfortable, or even harmful. But the need to connect, to express the emotion swirling within him, was too strong to resist. He gently brushed his lips against hers, a feather-light touch, a tentative exploration of the unfamiliar. It was a kiss born of fear and hope, of shared adversity and a growing connection that transcended species. It was a kiss that whispered of a love blooming amidst the chaos, a love that offered the promise of a new beginning, a new horizon, not just for them, but for their two species, a love carried on the whispers of Zephyr's troubled wind. The aftermath was a tapestry of devastation and fragile hope. The stabilizers had worked, halting the descent of the largest islands, but the smaller ones, already weakened beyond repair, had succumbed to Zephyr's turbulent winds. Relocation efforts were underway, a somber procession of Zephyrians carrying their salvaged belongings to the remaining islands. The air was thick with grief, the melodic calls of the sky birds now tinged with a mournful undertone. Aiden watched the scene unfold, his heart heavy with a mixture of relief and guilt. He had saved the majority of the islands, but he couldn't ignore the losses, the scattered debris that marked the final resting place of homes and communities. He felt Xylo's hand on his arm, a silent offering of comfort. Her feathers, usually vibrant and shimmering, were dull, reflecting the shared sorrow of her people. "We have lost much," she said, her voice soft, yet steady. "But we have also gained something, a new understanding, a new beginning." Her words, though tinged with sadness, held a spark of hope, a resilience that mirrored the spirit of Zephyr itself. He squeezed her hand, the warmth of her feathers a small comfort amidst the devastation. He knew she was right. The crisis had forged a bond between their two species, a fragile alliance born of shared adversity. Over the next few weeks, the rebuilding efforts began. Human technology, once viewed with suspicion, was now embraced, integrated into the Zephyrian way of life. Anti-gravity platforms, reinforced with Zephyrian wind harnessing techniques, provided stable foundations for the relocated communities. Aiden worked tirelessly, driven by a desire not just to rebuild, but to atone for the losses, to prove that humanity could be a force for good. His relationship with Xylo deepened amidst the shared effort. They worked side by side, their conversations a blend of scientific discourse and quiet, intimate moments. He learned about her hopes and dreams, her fears for her people, her desire to see Zephyr not just survive, but thrive. He shared his own dreams of creating sustainable ecosystems in space, a dream now intertwined with his desire to create a safe haven for her people. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the swirling clouds below in hues of orange and violet, Xylo turned to him, her feathers shimmering with a nervous energy. "Aiden," she began, her voice hesitant. "There is something I must tell you." He waited, his heart pounding in his chest. He sensed the weight of her words, the unspoken emotion swirling within her. "My people, they do not understand our closeness," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "They see you as an outsider, a threat." A wave of disappointment washed over him. He had hoped that their shared efforts, their growing connection, had bridged the cultural divide. But he realized that change, especially within a culture as deeply rooted as the Zephyrians, took time. "I understand," he said, his voice quiet. "But I won't give up. I'll prove to them that I'm here to help, that I care about Zephyr, about you." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something that felt like love. She reached out, her hand gently cupping his cheek. The warmth of her touch sent a jolt through him, a reassurance that their connection, though fragile, was real. "I know you will," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet confidence. He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes, savoring the moment. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and uncertainties. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. He had Xylo, her faith in him a beacon in the storm, a promise of a new horizon, a future where their love, born amidst the whispers of Zephyr's troubled winds, could blossom into something beautiful and enduring.